going from last week's teaching, Asela Harav, meaning that holiday waiting for you. It has a teaching for you, but you need to turn it from a class, as it were, something delivered over to you by the tradition and by the Clay Kodesh, the cantor, the rabbis, that you have as it were, opened within yourself. You've shaped within yourself a place for the teachings. I love this idea that has been created by the generations and also waiting for us. I know for me, when I read Rosh Hashanah, especially in Sfat Emet, my favorite Hasidic teacher, which I will have for our teachings on a Sunday, which I've been using my entire adult life. He was reading. He was the Sfat Emet. He died in 1905, a little town south of Warsaw. Died young, 57 years old. He was writing for his community. He spoke his Divrei Torah in Yiddish. After Shabbos, they quickly translated them into Hebrew. He was getting ready at the end of his life to take 30 some years of Shabbos teachings and go through them, edit them, and make them into one book. Well, he died before he could do it. So all we have are the notes from his teachings that his students decided not to turn into a finished product, but just provide as it were, the notes that his students remembered or that he prepared himself. And they left it to a later generation to study in a rather impenetrable form. But as I said to all of my students who study with me, once you break the code to Sfat Emet, you're in. So for whom did he write it? I think he knew he's writing it for a later generation. He wrote it for us. So how much the more so we look at the Talmud, the Midrash, all the Hasidic writings, they wrote it for a later generation, meaning our generation and generations to come. So one thing I want to share with you as we start our little bit tonight is create your own teachings. Number one, try to turn them into maxims, try to turn them into, as it were, memorizable form, and share them. I know we have many of you gathering on Sunday for the event that the Guths and JoJo are preparing, and many of you. Uh, I'll create a little video for the group, but I can't create it until I've finished a unit of teachings. I don't want to say something that it's been replaced by something else. So yes, the video is coming, and no, it's not quite not finished until I'm there. So in any case, you have something to teach. So you share it with your study partner. You share it with somebody you know. You can say, hey, I had an insight about Rosh Hashanah.
Hmm?
You're my
And if they're if they're game, they'll say, share with me your insight on Rosh Hashanah. And you don't know, it might have legs. It might touch people. So the first thing is it's a holiday with powerful metaphoric features that is there for you to encounter and create your own poetry, which is evidence of the transformation. Meaning, if you can write a poem about Rosh Hashanah, you've ingested it, you've internalized it, maybe even write it down, maybe even read it to somebody else. It doesn't have to be a good poem. You can say, it's not a poem, it's just a thought. Um, I had a very dear poet friend, and she was a really great poet. And I said, I want to try. And she said, go ahead, let yourself try to be a poet. So I wrote a couple of things and she said, okay, you're not a poet. That's okay. But your thoughts are great. So I said, well, my thoughts are great. And there's this one line, and I wrote a long poem. She said, that one line is a poem. So yeah, so I'm not a poet. And first was very generous. Not everybody's a scuba diver. So you're you're a good talker, you're a good thinker, you have good thoughts. So, but write your poem nevertheless, even if it's bad poetry. Write the poetry. If you want to get a start in writing poetry, I always recommend that people go to Billy Collins, Collins, Billy Collins. He's playful, he's deep, and it gives you a sense that poems don't have to be like, Rilke or my other favorite poems, obscure and difficult. They can be actually fun and enjoyable and still touch the heart. So, step one, see it as poetry being written by previous generations, set in the calendar for you to meet, inspires you to write your own poems, your own poetry, even if it's bad poetry, which is evidence that you actually have ingested it, and internalized it. That's step one. The next thing I want to share with you has to come from my reading maybe too much poetry the past couple of weeks, especially Rilke, Rumi, Ibn Gabirol, and others, Jung, Nietzsche. So I read my panoply of what I have on Kindle, the few books I brought here, and something's taken shape in me. And the next thing I want to talk about is the strange thing of what it means to have a self. Because if we're taking our self to court and we're trying to distinguish between the authentic self and the masked self, if we're trying to look at, sin with regret and shame, and then I remember the hundreds and hundreds of people that I've counseled, uh, I had some sense of spiritual and moral vertigo, which means what is the true self? I know people for whom they felt their life out there was a lie. So yeah, they wore a mask out there because their authentic self is something other than what they live. So others might consider them, quote unquote, a sinner. But deep inside, they say what they call a sin is the authentic thing that I'm doing. Um, so when we say what is sin, what is missing the mark? Well, there really is, as Hillman taught in his book on suicide and the soul, society, theology, psychology, they all try to reach in and tell you what's up. And Suicide and the Soul is a very imperfect book, but his main point was don't let other thought systems tell you who you are. This is very Nietzschean. At some sense, you are not what theology teaches. You're not what the tradition teaches. You're not what your parents say. You're not what everybody on your street says. There is something that I fear to call it authentic self. It's such an overused idea. But there's something called a self to be born. And if all you try to do is conform, and ask yourself what others think, there's a particular kind of hell there. I still have young people who seek a couple sessions of counseling who are in a tough relationship because their parents don't like the person. And I say, your parents are good initial information, but they're not the last information. And these are people that have been close to their parents their whole lives. They say, well, I don't know how to distill I from my parents. I says it's very difficult, but what you can do is you can teach your parents how to be better parents. And you can teach everybody else, including the anonymous tradition, including me, you can teach us how to be better guides for you as you search towards something that we'll call the authentic or true self. So I'll just give you an example. A person said, and this is something very, very common, by the way, not limited to here. Whenever someone says, I have a bad feeling about something, I think I may have mentioned this week, you can say to them, can you actually define what your bad feeling is and where it came from? If a person says of a bad feeling, you have an instinct, it came from somewhere. Something triggered it. If it was completely internal, they should say it. People say, well, I can't explain it. They actually can explain it. They're not taking the time to explain it. It's, part of our child raising. Whenever our children would say, I don't know why I did it, we say, we believe that you don't know why you did it, but we're asking you to cultivate the insight so you can say to yourself, I think I know why I did it. Now, remember, I think psychology would hold, certainly the Hasidic tradition would affirm, we have 10 different motivations for everything that we do. So the fact that you have 10 motivations for everything that you do doesn't mean that you can't uncover 7 out of 10 of them. We are complex. Everything we do is something like a compromise between the committee of the unconscious ego self, and then we do something, and you say, honestly, why did I do that? It's playful in our home when my wife says, why did you do that? I say, question or complaint. No, it's a real question. I say, are you asking me to go into the inner chambers of my heart and discover the various motivations found there, including the deepest, darkest chambers? And she'll say, yeah, that's actually exactly what I would like you to do. It's playful, but on other times it's real. I think we should really look inside and figure out why we do what we do, why we change our minds, what inspired us to one thing, what inspired us to do something else. Now, there's no better time to do it than right now during our preparation for Rosh Hashanah. Whatever your theology about God and the holiday is, this is a time for deep, serious investigation. Now, one reason I like Nietzsche, and again, this is not a recommendation to go out and read the corpus of Nietzsche, maybe just a Wikipedia article. If I were to put Nietzsche in just a couple of words, Nietzsche distrusts all systems. He doesn't trust religion. He doesn't trust philosophy. He doesn't trust any system that anybody else made. That was his definition of the Übermensch, the above person, meaning the person who lives above all the systems that everybody else has created. That's what he meant. He didn't mean Clark Kent. When he said the Übermensch, the above person, or the so-called Superman, which is a very bad translation, he meant the person who's escaped the gravity of everybody else's meanings and interpretations. I consider myself a very deeply religious Jew, even at times pious. But I've also broken through from the gravity and the shackles, meaning it's done enough to shape who I am, but I will never say, am I permitted to think this because it might contradict somebody? Am I permitted to think it because I'm the first person who thought it? Well, somebody's the first person who thought everything. So the fact that, well, they've never heard it before, I say, yeah, but a generation from now, they're going to say they've been hearing it all the time if I'm good at what I do. So, part of this, I think, was influenced by my readings of Nietzsche. So you can read about Nietzsche, that would be a good thing. And Kierkegaard. I know this sounds a little bit odd, as we're going into a religious holiday, read two of the most anti-religious thinkers that there are as you go on the path of self-discovery. But they're anti-religion because religion has, from their perspectives, has gotten in people's way. If you look at Kierkegaard, he's being choked by the deep but yet superficial Lutheran morality in his family, and all he sees is hypocrisy. All he sees is people who read the Bible but aren't changed by the Bible. People who practice the religion, but nothing happens to their inner lives. So Kierkegaard's this young guy who looks at it all. He's a furious thinker. I mean, it's impossible to systemize Kierkegaard. He's one of my favorite people to read because he's basically writing furious, energetic, cutting prose poetry. And just a tiny little book by Kierkegaard. They're not to be taken seriously, by the way, theologically. When I was in graduate school, we read, uh, uh, Kierkegaard's treatment on the binding of Isaac as if it were theology. He's just a guy who didn't like the story. He's a guy who didn't like Abraham for a very good reason. So we learned that as if it were emis, a theological statement. I want to raise my hand and say it's not theology. It's an angry guy. You can, there are angry people who wrote angry things, angry at the religion. So what better time to read people that are angry at religion than before Rosh Hashanah? Because what they're saying is break break through from the formalities, find your authentic self, and bring that to the religion. And who knows what you'll find there? Because the religion is greater than its formalism. The spirit is greater than the form in which it takes. If you want to transcend the forms, go beyond the forms, you have to go beyond the forms. You have to be a person that says, I'm willing to become a new person, therefore I'm willing to see new things. So the second step that I want to teach you, the first step is treat it like poetry that's been written down for you at this time. The second step is, I don't like using the word, but deconstruct religion before you practice religion. Break it down. Don't just accept the structure you're walking into. Break it apart and build a structure for you. Now, of course, we live in a world where we share common rituals. That's a very good thing. I'll say about that. It'll be the next thing that I say. It's a great thing that we share common rituals. But as I wrote in my email, we share stable rituals, but their meanings are as varied as the people who study them for meaning. So, yes, we blow the shofar. What it means after you learn the meanings is going to depend on you. So, my second thing is, and again, this influenced my Shabbat thought. I hope, I wrote it in a kind of a political fervor. When I ran it by my Rabbi, she said, "Oh my God, this is beautiful. What happened to you? What are you writing about?" And I said, just this whole idea of human identity, it just feels so shaky for me. It just feels so unfinished. I don't really understand, the connection between the lived life, the secret life, which is the real life, partly because of my own work, but certainly because of my client bases where people have said to me, I'm living a lie. I want to tell you the truth. No one else can know. I think I shared with you many years ago a great honor that was given to me on this theme of the secret life. A woman who had been married a long time, had a couple of kids, had a husband that objectively, it wasn't one of my favorite people. If I had like a list of favorite people, I didn't know if he would make it. She said to me, I want you to know I'm getting a divorce. I said, oh my gosh. She says, not now. She says, it's going to take 10 years. I can't tell my friends. I can't tell anybody, but I want a witness. I want you, because I intend to know you a long time. I want you to know what I'm going through. I've chosen you to be my witness. I've chosen you to know that I'm living a false life, but I'm on my way to a true life, and it's going to take 10 years before I can extract myself with some dignity and not hurt my children and my family too much. And I listened to her tell her story. It sounded like during a war, an agent going on a secret mission and said, I'm going on a secret mission. It's crucial to the war effort. I'm going deep underground, and I'll see you when the war's over. I said, when you come out, you're getting a medal. So I want to give you a medal now, but she says, no, to give me a medal when I'm out. I was still an assistant rabbi at Stephen Weiss Temple. So this must have been about 19, I'm going to say 91 or 92. And yes, it took the person less than 10 years, but she did it. And I saw her enough, and we would exchange glances, and then boom, there she was one day. And her kids then landed on their feet. The husband was being propped up by her a little bit, but he landed on his feet. And she definitely lived a different life. So the question is, if anybody saw her, they would say, wow, great wife, great mother, part of the community. Everybody can rely on her. Had no idea that she was living from an acute sense of falseness. And she said to me, again, I'm not the only counselor that's heard this. I'm just sharing with you my experience of it. She said to me, I don't need a therapist. I don't even know how I got this way and why I got this way. I just know I can't stand it anymore. And the only thing that keeps me going is I'm not going to live this way forever. I said, okay. So now let's imagine this person going to Rosh Hashanah. And God says, I want the truth. Is this where she says, oh, I have to snap myself into the life that I've chosen? Or do I have to choose a different life and try to live it? Right. And that's the kind of the thing where I think the instability of human identity, the instability of truth, of falsehood, of who we are, that we can take to God. That we can actually use Rosh Hashanah, have a conversation. One thing that I'm doing, that I'm sure many of you are doing, I'm reviewing every moment of my life. I'm examining the choices that I've made, what it means to live with choices, the excellent choices I've made. I think my choices have been sound. I think the execution has been my problem. I think I stand by what I've chosen, but I wasn't always aware of what was happening around me and acting within my choices. I would have done things differently. But this is the time for me to own that and to be whole with it and do whatever kind of repair I have to do. So this thing called the self of human identity, I think is unstable necessarily, because if it were completely stable, we wouldn't be able to transform. Part of what transformation is, I'm not authentic as I am. I'm not living my true life as I am. Is there a tradition that understands this? Yes. And as I'll talk more about on Sunday when I do the introduction to the spiritual dimensions. By the way, it might not be for you because you've been listening to me for a few years perhaps, but if you know anybody else who's open on Sunday, and it will be recorded, by the way, but they do have to register to get the recording. So there is a teaching Sunday morning Pacific time, 9:30, Israel time, 7:30 p.m. Register, you will get the recording. As far as I know, we're not charging anything. Someone says, I don't see the price. I said, it's evidence that we decided not to charge anything. Will we ask for a donation? Probably, certainly. Uh, But we're so late getting it together. We thought, it's a gift from you, by the way, assuming you're supporting what we're doing. I hope you do. So we just want people in. So if you know anybody who's not in the spiritual system, they can plug it in during their golf game, uh, while they're working on their car. Back in my day, people worked on their cars on Sundays, whatever. And then, of course, it's going to be recorded. So this is one thing I will talk about on Sunday evening here, morning there, and that is the instability of the self and how our three great metaphors on Rosh Hashanah, one being the shofar, the second being the courtroom, the third being transformation. Those are the three main metaphors I'll talk about: the shofar, the courtroom, and meditation. What I'm sharing with you tonight is what I'm bringing to those three metaphors: the shofar, the courtroom, the meditation, is an unstable self, uh, cultivated to be unstable because I can't transform if I'm stable. I have to cultivate an inner instability that I achieve personally by reading Rilke, who's very destabilizing, by reading Rumi, who's very, again, beautiful and destabilizing, uh, certainly by reading the Zohar, which is a profoundly unstable book, by reading Chassidus, Sfat Emet, again, introduces an instability into my life. Who am I? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And I'm reading Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. So those are my main sources now. Let me go ahead and repeat them in the order that I think I've read them in the past couple of days. First of all, Rilke. One of his poems that I read many years ago, keinen, keinen Mensch hat ein Leben, or no man has a life. And he goes on in the poem and he compares this to people that like we see a room with clothes hung on hooks. They're all limp. And those are our lives, and we've never lived inside of them. And he calls it the arsenal of unlived things. I think we use that as a second title of the email that I sent out. So if you can get the Barrows, Anita Barrows, Joanna Macy translation of Rilke, I think it's on page 164, right around there. No person lives his life. And again, it's not the a perfect Rosh Hashanah poem is good enough. Now, how the way Barrows and Macy's chose a brief selection of a much larger poem. Um, um, Hold on a second. Well, I'll try to find it for before we end tonight. They took an excerpt of a much longer poem, so you can look. No person has lived his life, Rilke, and you might come up with a larger poem. It's somewhere on my on one of my screens. All right, so that's a step two, cultivated instability, so that you are ready for transformation. Now, three questions that I ask beginners, that I ask myself, but I also ask every beginner, is where's your pain? Everybody has pain and suffering. Many people, because they live weighted down by regret. Many people are in pain because they've lived enough life to know they have less life ahead of them than is behind them. And they're in pain because they're actually going to be leaving in the midst of something beautiful. There's pain there too, but it's the pain of leaving behind the beautiful. Some of us live with ongoing grief of what we've done, and we've messed things up, or that other people have done things that have messed us up. Um, Sometimes it's the grief you just haven't figured things out. You know that you haven't found yourself. I know, um, in speaking to people here in Israel, I meet a lot of young people, and I met a young guy who's he's a fine guy, got a good job, very skillful, and he's really interested in like they've never met a reform rabbi. By the way, there's an anti-bias bias here. Someone said to me, "Why aren't I getting in the kind of the trauma work of soldiers. I said, I've tried. And they said, what happened? I said, well, they say, who are you? I said, I'm a rabbi with a spiritual counseling practice. The soldiers don't want rabbis. I said, what do you mean? Because they come in and say, put on tefillin and light Shabbos candles and do this and do that. I said, but I'm not that rabbi. I said, look at my body, my work. They say to me, the minute we say rabbi, the soldiers will start shooting at you. So, metaphorically, okay? Don't come. They don't want rabbis preaching people to put on tefillin and keep Shabbos. And so I got enough rejections to know I have to find an organization to join. I thought the logotherapy here, but it's not for me, so that I can do my work with the imprimatur of something beyond my title that worked pretty well for me. But it doesn't work here. When you say rabbi here, they go, oh God, Shabbos, tefillin, give me a break. And why'd you shave your beard? What are you hiding? So that's the problem of the title rabbi here in Israel. So anyway, so I'm talking to this guy. He says, "Well, what's your read on me? You know what? I mean, go ahead, take a read on what ought I be doing with my life? I'm in my late 30s. I'm accomplished. I make okay money." And so we talked, and I said to him, "You're a leader. You have the power to inspire people. You have a vision within." I said, "I don't know what to lead, but it's meaningful to you." And he more or less works from home independently. He says, how do I do that? How do I find where to lead?" He said, "I don't know." I said, but there's something in you. Now he may go through his entire life and this great charismatic personality he has, and the depth and the humor. And I felt, I want to work for you. You're a good man working on a good project. I'd be happy to be on your team. I just felt it, and other people feel it too. He says, I haven't found it yet. I said to him, you might never find it. It's going to be a tragedy. It's going to be a loss, but it's something to think about because you're young, you're talented, you have a good resume, you make decent money. You could do a lateral move to something else. You asked me, so I'm telling you that I think you're a natural leader, and there are people craving for someone to inspire them and organize them to do good things. And we left it at that. But here's an example where he's feeling so unsettled. So I tried to be his Rosh Hashanah, like in local Rosh Hashanah instead of in local parentis. I was his Rosh Hashanah in place, which means bring your instability to court and let the court say you're not living up to something in you so intrinsic and so clear that everybody around you can see it but you, and we don't have a solution for you, but we have a possibility for you. All right, so now I just want to talk very briefly about the symbols, and I'll be talking about this much more on Sunday morning, and then at next job is probably then after that. Oh, by the way, a little bit of news. I put a blog in the Times of Israel. I'm trying to move away from the Jewish Journal and putting blogs in the Times of Israel since I'm living here now. Of course, it's in English. Anybody can get it. So I do now have a blog at the Times of Israel in Israel, and I'll be publishing there much more lately. It's very easy to get stuff up, and hopefully it's a way for me to uh, to get over this disability of having the word the term rabbi in front of my name. It's stopping me from finding my fulfillment here. So in any case, what are these a brief run at the three symbols, then I'll be happy to take your questions. The first symbol is the shofar, and in the shofar again, as I read my sources, one is Maimonides, who's very rational, and he uses the phrase "Uru uru nirdamim," wake up, your sleepers. There's a moral and spirituality that awaits us. You've gotten into a rut. You're not challenging yourself. You're living on what you used to do and not what you ought to be doing. And that's a profound, profound meaning. You hear the blast of the shofar and you're waking up. Because the Bible doesn't tell us what it's about. It just says on the first day of the seventh month there will be a Yom Truah, okay, a day of the sounding of the shofar. It doesn't tell us what it's about. You really come to the deeper meanings later. So another meaning of Rosh Hashanah, of the blasting of the shofar, which we find in the liturgy. A great liturgist chose from Psalm 130, where it says, "Min miha ma'amakim kiratichiyah." From the depths I have cried out to you. Amok means deep, and emek is a valley. Ma'amakim is the depths. And of course, when they say mihamakim, they don't mean like Jonah swallowed by the whale, that kind of deep. They mean the soul depths. So whoever wrote that psalm, Psalm 130, from my depths I have cried out to you, they're telling us a couple of things. Some people cry out, but not from the depths. They cry out because they're not happy, because they're disappointed. They want more out of life. But there's a person who goes all the way to the deep, to the inarticulate cry that says, I'm suffering. There's pain here. So, how do you express it to God? You don't find words. And the Hasidic tradition, including Sfat Emet, says the meaning is created, it is found in the inarticulated scream, the inarticulated sound of the shofar. It's as if and again, the mitzvah is to listen to the shofar, but I'm giving the metaphor of the actual blasting of the shofar, which is you take a deep breath, you go into yourself, and all you find is the feeling. And you blow the shofar, and it's as if the single note of the shofar, it rises, and the divine knows how to decode it. The divine is decoding your inarticulate blast of the shofar. The divine puts it into words, as it were, into meaning, and the meaning is given back to you as the grace and gift of God. Now, so this is Kabbalistic and Hasidic. I'm again, I don't know. I'm not talking theology here. I'm talking that every day I try to do a meditation. I try to sit for at least a half an hour, and it's not transcending consciousness. It's I'm going deeper and deeper and deeper. I feel like I'm going through. Here are my thoughts, feelings, and emotions for today. Let me go into that. Let me go into my array of unconscious selves that are producing it. Let me go under that to the some kind of key in which my unconscious is playing. I want to go under that into the fountain of life flowing up from my soul. I want to go laterally into the shadow. Um, I want to go even deeper than that, the terrain under the cave of the shadow and even under the fountain. I mean, it's a guided meditation. It's not simple for me, but I try to stay at it. Um, and I want to see what's there. I want to see the underground chamber of my being, the things that I've repressed, lost, left behind, never saw, and be there enough that I'm overwhelmed with a feeling that I don't know how to say. And I try to just memorize the feeling. I have a shofar here at home that I'll use on Rosh Hashanah, and then I just try to find my shofar and very inelegantly sound my shofar. I'm getting better, and it's an incredible a journey to just go through one level after another of your consciousness, and you get down into it's not the Jungian shadow where we repress the unseen, as it were. It's the darkness of what Rilke calls the arsenal of unlived things. By the way, that's where I think Rilke went when he wrote that poem. No one lives their life. And the end of that middle stanza, the arsenal of unlived things. He went to a deep place to see a room where clothes are on hooks, and he looks at them and says, no one's ever worn these clothes. And everybody has a wardrobe down in the secret regions of clothes living on a hanger that have never inhabited a human being, and they're yours. And they want you to try on and see if these clothes fit. It's like the Zohar has a take when Jacob was getting ready to lie to his father. Remember, people say, but he lied to his father. I said, because the lie was the truest thing he can do, right? Esau was not supposed to get the blessing. What if the world is out of order and your mother says the only way out of this is to lie to your father and pretend you're your brother? You're going to have to do this duplicitous thing to set the world to right. So, I used to have seventh graders say, but he lied. I said, there's something deeper than that going on. Give the story a break, read the story. So the Zohar says that this coat of, the from the Garden of Eden was passed down generation to generation. And it's like the sword in the stone, the King Arthur legend of Arthur pulling the sword out of the stone. It's like Esau would put on the jacket and it just didn't fit. He took it to a tailor and the whole thing. And the minute that Jacob put it on, if I understand the Zohar correctly, it says it's a form that finally got filled in. Okay, now, what are they referring to? When they would have documents for example, for a divorce, they would write the form out, to have a few ready because it's calligraphy. And then when the people would come, they'd fill in their names. It's called a tofes. So it's actually used in civil law, meaning the contract before it's filled in. So the Jake the jacket that Jacob put on that had hair on it actually was Esau's jacket that had been passed generations since Adam. And every generation that it would go down, people would try it on, and some it would fit and some it wouldn't. So Jacob tries it on, and the Zohar says it's like a tofes that was finally filled in. The jacket finally fit on the man for whom the jacket was designed, meaning the true man of the generation. So when I read Rilke's poem that there's a room of unworn clothes, of unlived lives, an arsenal of unlived things, it was such a powerful metaphor for me that I couldn't shake it. And then reading Rumi, who's a power of similar depth and strength, and then Kierkegaard, and then going back to my Bible, let me share with you one line that jumped out at me. I try to carry, as you know, a line of the Bible around with me every day. So I was in chapter 33. This is Psalms chapter 33, verse 14. I'll start with verse 13. From heaven, God looks down. He sees all humankind. From his dwelling place, he oversees all the inhabitants of earth. He who fashions their hearts together, or at one time, who comprehends all their deeds. In the Hebrew, verse 14. Mishamayim hebit Adonai. From God, from heaven, God views human beings. Ra'ah et kol b'nei Adam, sees every human being. Mchon shivto hishgiach. He watches carefully from the place of his sitting. El kol yoshvei haaretz, to every dweller on earth. Hayotzer yachad libam. Either he creates their hearts to beat together, or at one time created all their personalities. Hamivin, it called Ma'asehem. And there's so many more psalms, but this is a psalm that a verse that I encountered this week. Um, and also in the High Hall liturgy that I go over, there's a phrase, Hacham Arazim, the God who's wise to all the secrets. The secret to your life that you're trying to figure out. There's so many stories of the person who's burdened by a secret, and then one day the secret is revealed, their life comes together. Well, try to imagine you're living a secret and you're never going to discover the secret. You're just never going to come together, and you're going to have to piece it together yourself. So these different things, the shofar blast, the unarticulated cry, the courtroom where the real self has to show up, and we're right now destabilizing the idea of the real self, and the idea of transformation from what to what. So where is the pain? And once you find out what the pain is, you can ask yourself where it came from. And it might not be your parents, it might be life itself. And then what are you going to do about it? It's three questions I always ask. And one thing I'm going to do about it is I'm going to take Rosh Hashanah seriously. I mean, I'm going to read the Bible, and I'm going to read Rilke, and I'm going to read Rumi, and I'm going to read everything else, all with an eye toward I'm going to hear a shofar, I'm going to show up in court, and I need to change. These three things never, ever leave my mind during these days. All right, that's my teaching for tonight. Does anybody